All right, folks, joining us now on Big Ten Country. You certainly recognize this man. He's been with us several times. He breaks down Illinois unlike anyone else. He is Jeremy Werner of Illini Inquirer. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us on Big Ten Country, man. It is really great to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's fun to talk about what is a big game between two ranked opponents, including at Illinois in mid-September. This hasn't happened often. Actually, it hasn't happened ever in me covering this team. So it's going to be a big one on Friday night.
I won't mention what happened the last time Illinois started a season 3-0. For those that don't know, I believe they ended up 6-0, Jeremy, and then lost their last 6 games of the season. Isn't that how that went in 2011? I think it was.
Yeah, it was a heck of a start. For people that don't remember, AJ Jenkins was awesome that season. Nathan Schulhaus was great that season. But then it all came tumbling down, and they actually were favorites at home against Ohio State that year.
That's how crazy it was.
Yeah, because Luke Fickell was the interim head coach after all the tattoo gate, which seems really tame nowadays.
Tattoo gate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was all going down. Penn State was down then. Michigan was down then. So it was really Wisconsin's conference. And Illinois started 6-0 and had a couple ranked games. And people can relitigate whether Ron Zook should have been fired. Yes, he should have. He lost 6 straight games, and he was 19-38 in the Big Ten, I believe, was the final. It's just they hired the wrong guy after that. But yeah, that didn't happen. So go so well. But with the schedule the way it's set up, I don't think Illinois is going to lose its final 6 games here this year.
You heard it here first on Big Ten Country. Jeremy Werner says he doesn't think Illinois will lose their last 6 games of the season. But before we get to that, we got to get to this because we're a quarter of the way into the year. I think before the season, there were paths that we saw to them being 3-0 at this point in the season. I'm not sure we quite anticipated some of the strides forward we've seen some of the players on this team make. So, Jeremy, I'm going to pose a question to you that I've really been grappling with, and that is based on preseason expectations and kind of what we thought this Illini group would be as they sit 3-0, as they sit ranked heading into this game. How would you grade the Illini so far? Is this above what you expected, or is this about what you kind of foresaw happening?
Oh, I think it's got to be at least an A-, because there's certain things they can get better at. I'm concerned going into Nebraska and going into Big Ten play about can they run the ball and can they stop the run? Those are 2 concerns I have. But I actually thought, and this isn't to pat myself on the back, I thought they had a good chance to beat Kansas, 1, because it was at home, 2, because they've been thinking about that game for a long time. That was an embarrassment last year, and it was the first sign of, oh my gosh, this isn't 2022 anymore. But also, Kansas lost its offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, who I think is a dude at Penn State now. And I think you're seeing he's kind of infusing that offense. And they replaced him with Jeff Grimes at Baylor, who had been fired from Baylor. So I just had questions about that. So I thought Illinois would play well. But guys, I didn't think it would be because of their defense, right? Like the defense has been the biggest sign of life, biggest encouraging thing, because it's going to keep you in games. And I feel like Luke Altmaier in this passing attack, I thought it would be good. It maybe has even been a little bit better than I thought because it's been more efficient, no turnovers. Pat Bryant's turning into a full-blown star. Zachary Franklin is what I thought he would be, which is a really, really good wide receiver in the Big Ten. But the defense, its ability to get takeaways and look more like 2022, right? There's not a Devin Witherspoon here, at least we think. But Xavier Scott has really emerged as a playmaker with 4 takeaways through 3 games. I thought Miles Scott would be better in his second year as a starter. Well, he's got 3 takeaways in 3 games. You're starting to see the experience of last year, which they didn't have a lot of on defense. It's really starting to come through in that these guys understand the defense. The communication is at a high level. And, year 2 of Aaron Henry, I think he's improved with his game planning and such. So the defense taking a huge step forward. I thought they would get better because they had to get better, but they've taken a huge step forward where I think they can be a strength of this team. And then you add a passing attack that I think is one of the better passing attacks in the Big Ten. And I think you give yourself a chance to make some noise in the Big Ten. Of course, we'll learn a lot more about them the next 2 weeks going to Nebraska and going to Penn State.
Jeremy, take away the players that you mentioned defensively. What other players have stood out to you this season that you didn't expect for them to excel at this point? But also, what has Illinois perhaps changed defensively since the last time they played Nebraska or lost to Nebraska?
Well, actually, the defense was pretty good last year against Nebraska. Nebraska ran all over them, but they had, I think, Heinrich was their backup quarterback at the time. Jeff Sims got replaced. He came in, just kind of gave him a running threat. They're facing a much bigger, threat now with Dylan Raiola and how talented he is, probably potential likely NFL quarterback. But I do think their defensive front has done its job. It's been more of a bend but don't break against the run, and they didn't have a lot of sacks and pressures through the first 2 games, but they didn't try to sack Jalen Daniels. They tried to contain Jalen Daniels and make him a pocket passer, and they did. They got 4 takeaways from Jalen Daniels because of it, including a career-high 3 interceptions for him. So they did their job extremely well. And then last week against Central Michigan, they're finally able to kind of pin their ears back. And you saw Seth Coleman and Gabe Akis dominate the game. But one guy who's been really good so far, maybe better than expected, is T-Rod Edwards. He's in his 3rd year at Illinois and plays the nose tackle position that doesn't get a lot of stats, right? Like at that nose tackle position, you're mostly stopping the run, making teams go away from the middle of the field. But he's been able to get some pass rush pressure. And I do think Dennis Briggs Jr., Florida State transfer, has been really solid and getting better. So I think that defensive front, the starters are good. I do think they can give up some running yards because it's not the biggest group, but it is athletic, and I think they're versatile. So I think and they really complement what is a strong back end with Miles Scott, Xavier Scott, and Matthew Bailey has come in and played really well at that strong safety position. So I think the veterans they have on defense are really shining through.
I thought Northern Iowa did a fairly good job of disguising some of their coverages at times against Dylan Raiola, maybe baited him into making a few throws he shouldn't have made. I know he missed a couple of spots during the game. Matt Rule had talked about that. Do you see kind of a similar approach for Illinois? I know you mentioned the takeaways, but just like schematically, is this a team that's going to be able to really kind of screw with Dylan Raiola's vision, this only being his 4th college start? Do you think they're going to be able to make those kind of scheme changes to really kind of give him something to think about before he pulls the trigger on those passes?
I think the whole goal of this game is to make Dylan Raiola look like a freshman playing in his Big Ten opener. Now, he doesn't play like a freshman, at least what we've seen so far, but he has not played a great defense, right? Like Colorado's got a few players, and Travis Hunter's a stud, but that's not a great defense. It hasn't been a great defense under Deion Sanders, and they've played 2 other low-level teams. I do think this Illinois defense that held Kansas to 17 points is the best defense they will have played. And again, when we're talking about the veterans, Illinois is able to disguise things a little bit more because these guys know how to do that. You've seen Xavier Scott bait last week, Central Michigan quarterback Joe Labus into an interception because it looked like he was playing man and it was really cover 3. You've seen Miles Scott kind of bait quarterbacks and just kind of read their eyes really, really well. So I find that matchup the most interesting is a veteran secondary against a very talented guy who doesn't look like a freshman, but he is a freshman. Dylan Raiola hasn't seen certain things that he's going to see going into Big Ten play now against Big Ten talent, against Big Ten defensive coordinators. So I find that fascinating, and that's what they have to do because Dylan Raiola has gotten rid of the ball really quickly. I think in the FBS right now, he's 13th of quickest to throw time. Illinois needs to confuse him a little bit so that the guys up front can get after him because he's not a great runner. He can make time with his feet and make some plays and prolong some plays. But you got to get him thinking a little bit more because he's been too comfortable against his first 3 teams. Because if you give him time, he can dice you apart because he's a ridiculous talent.
Jeremy, I kind of want to stick there, but you mentioned that with this bend don't break when it comes to the run defense, and Nebraska's averaging 4.5 yards per rush. Would you think with Dylan Raiola, it's best perhaps to put the game on his lap and take away the running game? Of course, you always want to take away the running game, but force him to be more of a guy operating from the pocket than allowing them to have a balanced attack with Deontay Dow kind of getting off on Illinois?
Yeah, I think the goal would be to make him beat you and show that he can, right? Maybe he can. Like maybe he's just good enough that he does beat you, but I think you want him to show that he can. Yeah, you don't want to give up 200 yards on the ground here and make things easy in the play action pass or set him up on 2nd and 3. That's easy for a quarterback, right? So yeah, I do think that's going to be really important. I think Matthew Bailey, the strong safety, plays a huge role in that. He hasn't had the chance to make a bunch of big plays, but his versatility to be an extra linebacker basically in the box, but also a guy who can go and cover and play a 2 deep safety if you go cover 2 every once in a while. That's really important. So, they can kind of move him around and put him in the box or send him deep and put him into coverage. I think that's going to be really important, but it could be a losing strategy if Dylan Raiola is just that good. But yes, I do think you want to force him to beat you with his arm, similar to Jalen Daniels. Now, I think Raiola is a better passer, but you want those guys to have to make plays under duress where you can really pin your ears back and get after the pass rush.
I did want to make sure that I mentioned that, just because I know that, you're obviously not going to have, the ability to get at Raiola very easily if he's getting rid of the ball that quickly. How overall would you kind of rate Illinois' pass rush this season? I know they don't have like maybe the gaudiest of stats, but just after a year after you saw guys like Johnny Newton leave, what's been your impression so far of their pass rush and their ability to create that pressure?
Yeah, again, the Kansas game, you didn't get a great vibe for it because they really weren't trying to send the rush. They had a spy on Jalen Daniels, so there was mostly 3- and 4-man rushes against him, and the outside linebackers are very talented. Seth Coleman and Gabe Akis didn't get after it all that much. But now, the last week against Central Michigan, which Joe Labus is a pocket passer, you saw these guys against the Central Michigan offensive line that's way worse than Nebraska. But in the first 2 games, guys, I was just looking up this stat. Against Central Michigan, Illinois defensive front had 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 17 pressures. That was more pressures, tackles for loss, and sacks that they had in the 2 first games combined. So I do think it showed that this group can rush the passer. Again, they're athletic. Dennis Briggs Jr. is an athletic guy in the interior. They can move Gabe Akis on the inside too. He's played more of the 4-eye technique at some points this season. And when he gets one-on-one matchups with a guard, that's really good. But you need those guys to perform like the stars you thought they were. Seth Coleman and Gabe Akis were 2 of the 3 guys, along with Pat Bryant, the wide receiver, that they brought to Big Ten Media Days because they think they are 2 of the most talented players on the team, 2 guys that will play in the NFL. To beat Nebraska on the road, those guys are going to have to produce a lot of pressure. Maybe it's not sacks, but you got to put pressure on him that maybe leads to a takeaway for your secondary.
Jerry, my last defensive question, sticking with pressure, if you know, where do you think would be the easiest place to attack on Nebraska's offensive line for the defensive down?
Well, I've seen one of their guards could be out. Muskuga, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but that he could be out. They are a veteran offensive line, and I have a lot of respect for Matt Rule because he understands what wins in the Big Ten. I felt like Scott Frost did not. Scott Frost tried to beat Oregon in the Big Ten, and I'm talking old school Oregon. Now Oregon, but he kind of tried to run this Pac-12 offense in the Big Ten, and it just never worked because he didn't have good line play. It all starts up there, and Matt Rule has done a fantastic job of retaining talent. Has been a big part of that, but they're playing the trenches has been so much better. So this is the best, I think, offensive line that Illinois has gone up against. Kansas had some good players, especially at tackle, but I think it's that interior, and it's why I think a guy like Gabe Akis being able to play both on the edge and slide inside on some obvious passing downs, I think he becomes a handful because you can only double one guy, and usually that would probably be Seth Coleman getting some chip help, but Gabe Akis getting a one-on-one against the guard, I really like that matchup.
We've been raving about the defense, and I think rightfully so, but there is a player on offense that I've been dying to ask you about, man, because each game I've watched Illinois and watched the progression of Pat Bryant into a really bona fide threat in a lot of ways. I feel like his route running has been better. I love the strength that he shows on the football. The Central Michigan game, I thought, were a few great examples of that. What's been the biggest driving force behind this really ascent that he is on right now as being the primary pass catching threat for the Illini?
What I love about Pat Bryant, guys, is he is the old school story of development, because this hasn't been like a rapid ascent for Pat Bryant. It's been a gradual one. He played as a freshman, but was mostly a blocker, right? And he had a couple opportunities to make catches. His second year, he started a lot of games and had around 400 yards. The next year with Casey Washington and Isaiah Williams, he was a really good player, 40-plus catches, 500 yards, but he had some inconsistency. He dropped some touchdown catches, particularly at Minnesota. He dropped 3 passes that would have scored points, 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. Now, almost everything thrown his way is a catch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he is a stud blocker. I don't know if there's a better blocker in the Big Ten at wide receiver, but of course he can go up and get it. He can make plays after the catch, but he is taking that star turn right now. I jinxed him when I tweeted this because the last 2 targets he did not catch, but his first 15 targets of the year, he had 15 catches for 235 yards and 4 touchdowns. Pretty good. And that includes a good performance against Kansas. That has one of the best secondaries in the country with Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant. So he's been really great. And they expected him to. He's a team captain, and he's kind of a tone setter. But the great part for Illinois guys is they have another number one wideout too. Pat Bryant, you can double him, but then you leave Zachary Franklin open. And if you put him in one-on-one coverage, or if you try to zone him, he's going to find that spot in the zone, or he's going to find a way to get open in one-on-one coverage. This is the active NCAA career receiving yards leader. So to have two number ones like that is huge for this offense, because Luke Altmaier feels like he can trust those guys. I think Luke Altmaier's done a better job this season of kind of trusting his wide receivers to go get the ball.
Your thought.
Ken, before
I'm sorry.
I was literally just going to say that I had to call Jeremy to account for that and also own some of this myself, because when you tweeted that about Pat Bryant, I was fanboying over him at the time in our group chat that we have for Big Ten Country. I totally cited that, and then immediately the next two targets didn't work out. So
now, he did catch one in the end zone. He did catch one of those in the end zone, but his toe was out of bounds.
Yep.
It was an amazing catch, but yeah, it was out of bounds.
I just wanted to make sure that the public knew it wasn't all your fault. I played my own role in this.
Jeremy, your thoughts on Luke Altmaier's progression this season, but also what he needs to do for Illinois to beat Nebraska?
It's been what he thought it would be. It's been what the coaches hoped it would be, which is in your second year as a starter, you're more comfortable. You're more confident. Your processing speeds up a little bit, right? You've seen stuff that for a year, and you've learned from your mistakes. You've learned how to deal with the pressure of being a Big Ten starting quarterback. So this is just the natural progression. And this is what's fun about watching some of these college guys, and even in the NFL, guys that get better through this experience. And Luke is just so confident in himself right now. He's so confident in what his coordinator wants out of him, because this is the first year of his college career that he's had the same coordinator for 2 straight years. At Ole Miss, he had 2 coordinators, and then he comes to Illinois, has a new coordinator. So him and Barry Lunny are really in sync right now, and his receivers are really in sync. And I think the next 2 weeks, Luke has a real chance to show that he's one of the top quarterbacks in the Big Ten. If you go and win one of these games at a ranked opponent, this is the question I've had about him is, can he elevate the rest of his team, right, to big wins? Because he's got the talent, guys. He's 6'2". He's a little slight, but he's athletic. He can make plays. I love his demeanor. I think that's really improved this year as he kind of knows how to deal with things. But he's got a strong arm. He's got an accurate arm. His touch is great on deep balls. So he's got all those skills. But now it's like go winning time. And I'm really interested to see over the next 5 games, Illinois is playing 4 ranked opponents. Can Luke Altmaier go lead Illinois to some wins over those teams? And if he does, I think he's going to be starting to talk about him. I think he's going to start getting the attention of, hey, this former 4-star that was at Ole Miss and was competing with Jackson Dart for the starting job 2 years ago, he's pretty dang good. And Illinois' passing attack is really good and maybe one of the better in the Big Ten. So he's got to go prove that against Nebraska, which is one of the best defenses in the Big Ten. He's got to go prove that against Penn State, which is one of the most talented defenses in the Big Ten. But I'm excited to see it because we've seen progress to this point. But for Illinois to win games like this, their quarterback's going to have to go to another level. I think he's capable of it, guys. But now he gets to go a chance to go prove it.
Don't come on here and get us too hyped, Jeremy. Don't you dare come on here.
He's really talented, guys. He's really mature. I know he wasn't voted a team captain, but I've loved everything I've heard from him. But as you know, like when the pressure amps up, it's always interesting to see how these guys react to it.
Speaking of that pressure, I feel like Nebraska is one of those teams where you can't really zero in on one of their pass rushers in particular. It's a team that likes to throw different looks. I think they have 8 different players with sacks this season. Is Illinois' offensive line equipped to handle that kind of a challenge when you've got attacks coming from all those different directions?
I think they are at the tackle spots. They hit 2 home runs in the transfer portal with J.C. Davis from New Mexico and Melvin Priestley from Grambling. Both those guys have been probably even a little bit better than we imagined. JC's not as great in the run game. Melvin's a beast in the run game, but JC is so consistent as a pass blocker. He had his first mistake of the year against Central Michigan where he missed a guy in the cutting him. The interior has actually been pretty good pass protecting. Luke Altmaier's had a lot of time Central Michigan got a couple sacks last week, and Illinois did not play its best up front, but I thought for the most part they pass protected well. They have to be able to run the ball at some point, though, and I'm more concerned about Nebraska's run defense of Illinois just running into a wall. Last year, Illinois had 21 rushing yards on 19 attempts last year against Nebraska, and they basically returned the exact same defensive front. Nash Hutmaker is a polar bear, as they call him, 6'4", 310 pounds. Ty Robinson's even bigger. Both these guys in single-digit numbers. They fill out those uniforms. Ty's 6'6", 310, something like that, probably an NFL player. Then Jamari Butler's a really good pass rusher. I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but the brother of Princely, who's at Ole Miss, is stud pass rusher. He's a young guy, sophomore. He's a really talented player as well. So Nebraska's going to throw some stuff at Illinois. They're by far the best defense Illinois has gone up against. So I'm interested, guys, because they have really tried, Illinois, to run the ball early in games and to establish the run to the point where they've been pretty predictable with it in the first half. But when they need to go score at the beginning of the second half, they've really leaned into the passing attack. They've gone RPO. They've really thrown it downfield. And I'm just wondering, is this the game where they pass to set up the run? Because you can't just throw the ball, I think, 60 times and expect to win against a team like Nebraska. But I do think you can, throw the RPO game there a little bit more on first downs and target Zachary Franklin for a 5-yard slant to set you up in 2nd and 5, because they've just been getting in behind the chains a little bit too much. So I'm wondering if Barry Lunny leans into that a little bit earlier, because that's where they've had success. They're able to throw the ball with their quarterback, their pass protection, their receivers, but they got to get Caden Fagan going. They got to find a way to get him to the second level, because while Khalil Valentine, the freshman's looked good, can he pass block? I'm not sure. I think where the ball is going when he's in the game for the most part. So I just feel like you got to find a way to get Caden Fagan in the game, whether that's jump off passes to him, screen passes to him, or just blocking a little bit better, calling different plays, but maybe passing to set up the run is the way to go.
I just have one big picture question left, James. Jeremy, from the outside looking in, why does it seem like with this coaching regime, development on the players has been a lot more consistent?
It's a good coaching staff. That's it. I mean, Illinois, this is the best head coach I've seen at hiring people. When they put together the initial staff, it was probably the best staff I'd seen since 2011, when Illinois had Paul Petrino, Vic Koenig, Jeff Brom was a young quarterbacks coach for Illinois at that time. That was a pretty good staff. But the staffs that Brett Bielema has put together are very impressive. I think it tells you a little bit about the investment they're making in football and how much they are willing to spend on those assistants. And Josh Whitman, the athletic director, has done a good job of that. But also tells you the respect that Brett Bielema has in the industry. And he's got a long history of coaching trees of head coaches: Dave Dorn, Ryan Walters now at Purdue, Paul Christ at Wisconsin. Like they've had a really good coaching tree here, and he's still a pretty young coach in his 50s. So they've just hired really good people. One of the additions this offseason, Corey Parker, comes from Toledo. He developed Quinyon Mitchell, right? At Toledo. Aaron Henry developed all those DBs that are in the NFL now. What Brett Bielema and Bart Miller have done on the offensive line. George McDonald did a heck of a job recruiting some wide receivers, and Barry Lunny's had some success with wide receivers from his time at UTSA. So I just think it's a good coaching staff. I said when Brett Bielema got hired, and he hired his first staff, it's a staff Wisconsin fans, Iowa fans would be happy with. And what are those staffs we know from those times? Like, they develop players and turn 3 stars into draft picks. And Illinois is not loaded with a bunch of 4 stars, but they're seeming to get a lot out of their guys. That took a step back last year, right? And that was part of it, is maybe they trusted their develop a little bit too much. But this year, you're seeing Miles Scott and Xavier Scott turn into stars for this team. But you're also seeing guys from the transfer portal, like a Luke Altmaier, like Zachary Franklin, like Dennis Briggs Jr. Those guys are huge. You have to go find some playmakers from the transfer portal. I thought this was by far their best year in the portal. J.C. Davis and Melvin Priestley being 2 other examples.
No, love all of that feedback on this regime. I think that Ken and I have talked often about how it feels different and how they just seem to really have, as you mentioned, a great grasp on who they're bringing in terms of coaches and then ultimately players. So love all of that, Jeremy. Back to the games on Friday, under the lights, big stage on Fox. 9.5 point favorite, 8.5 point favorite Nebraska is, depending on what kind of book you look at. How do you see the game playing out? Do you think that that line's a little bit too aggressive on behalf of Nebraska? How do you see things playing out there in Lincoln?
Yeah, Nebraska at home, right? I think they're probably, you look on paper, a little bit more complete of a team with their ability to run the ball, stop the run. But I think both of these teams have been tested by Power 4 teams. Colorado is not as good as Kansas, in my opinion. I know Kansas lost to UNLV, but I think Kansas is probably a better team. And I love what Lance Leipold is doing there. That said, Colorado's got some really good talent. So I do think it's probably a little bit more even matchup than that. Maybe I would have thought like 7 points or something like that. But I think if you're Illinois, you want to start well, but you really want to force Dylan Raiola to make some big plays in crunch time. He hasn't had to do that yet. And Northwestern as a program has had issues with close games, right? So you want to put them in that situation where in the fourth quarter, they have to make plays in crunch time, because I've covered Illinois for a long time, guys. They've had issues with that too, right? And it kind of, oh no, here we go again. What could go wrong? It crops up in your head. And this is a very veteran Nebraska team that has dealt with all those close game issues. So if you're Illinois, that's what you want to do. You want to put the pressure on them. And if you can start fast and kind of put pressure on them to feel like, oh man, we got to make a big comeback and force Dylan Raiola to make some plays that he shouldn't. As a freshman, feels like he's got to win the game like in the second quarter. That's what you'd like to do. But I'm concerned about Illinois' ability to run the ball and stop the run against Nebraska. So I think Nebraska should be the favorite at home, 400 sellout Friday night, which is a huge game for both these programs. Like, I feel like Matt Rule, he's kind of where Brett Bielema was 2 years ago, trying to invigorate a program. And this, it's weird to say against Illinois, this could be an arrival game for them to go 4-0 and to be 2 games with 8 left from a bowl game. And looking at their schedule, that should be easy. They should get that by early October. So I think for them, that's a big moment. But for Illinois, man, if they win this, you're going into Penn State as a top 20 team. You're going into Penn State, and this really tough part of the schedule is a team that nationally people are going to start talking about. And I think they had a little bit of that in 2022. But for people to be, man, Brett Bielema, like, this is the second year we're talking about Illinois in the last 3, like, this is kind of interesting. What's happening there? Can they be the next Wisconsin? Can they be the next Iowa? I think we'd be starting to talk about that. Of course, they have to win a lot more games, but these are the moments you want. Like, I know Brett Bielema tried to downplay the meaning of one game. Aaron Henry went off on rankings, but you want to be ranked. You want to be asked these questions about what kind of these games would mean, because it doesn't happen very often at Illinois, guys. So I'm excited. They get to test themselves and show how much they've improved as a program and how much they've improved in one season after getting trounced by Nebraska at home last year.
My self-imposed rule is that I can never pick Illinois to win a game like this. I always have to pick against them because I consider myself a horrible jinx. So I'm picking Nebraska here, even with Jeremy filling me with all sorts of optimism. What direction are you going, Ken? Did Jeremy convince you?
No, I thought about this yesterday. I'm just off of the love and the strength, and I don't care if my record takes an L. We've been asking for this. I'm going with Illinois. Like, before Jeremy joined us, we were talking about it. This could mean a lot for our state. I know this is Big Ten country, but we tell you guys all the time, these are our state schools. You're going to have to deal with it. And I think the fact that Nebraska, and look, I love Jeremy. We've talked about it a lot. I love that Matt Rule is awakening a sleeping giant, because I was unsure if that sleeping giant could ever be awoken again. But for what it can mean for the Illinois, and Nebraska's still not there just yet, even though talent-wise he's doing a great job and how he's recruiting locally. But I think this has upset written all over it. And all you need is a young quarterback who is somewhat petulant. I mean that in a good way. Just to give a turnover or two for an Illinois team to take it. So I'm going with Illinois to win this game.
Well, I did pick Nebraska. So I picked Nebraska, but I picked a close game. I had Illinois covering. I think it's going to be a phenomenal Big Ten football game on a Friday night between two ranked opponents. And it's interesting. Nebraska fans that I've interacted with have a lot of respect for Illinois. So it kind of goes into like, I think these programs are getting the respect back. It's been amazing. Nebraska has been as bad as it's been since it's joined the Big Ten. But Illinois has just been competitive. And I don't think it's going to be an easy out for Nebraska. And like you said, if they get the takeaways, that's going to swing a game. And Illinois has won the last 2 games in Nebraska, largely because they've taken the ball away from the Cornhuskers. So Dylan Raiola is the man of the moment here. If he plays like, a 5-star, but a sophomore or a junior like he has so far this year, Nebraska's probably going to win. If Illinois makes him look like a freshman, I think Illinois wins.
Jeremy, we literally could keep you here for hours and you would constantly like find new nuggets of information for us to really enjoy, but we're going to let you go. We're going to, let you go about your day. We really appreciate you making the time to join us. And as always, thank you so much for being so generous with that time. We really do appreciate you, man.
Anytime, guys. Enjoy the game.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, folks. Ken and I were thrilled when USC got added into the Big Ten for this season. And so we were also really excited to see them taking on Michigan in their first conference game. And to break that game down for us, we have a very special guest. He is Ryan Abraham. He is the owner and publisher of USCFootball.com. You can find him on X at Inside Troy. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's Big Ten podcasts are great. It's a whole new experience for me. I think my shirt matches your logo, so that's pretty cool. So yeah, we're good.
that powder blue, it always has to come down to that. I know it's a little UCLA. We did not do that intentionally. We promise.
No, that's all right. I got like a ton of like 247 sports shirts, so I got all the different colors. When I wear ones like this, people are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I got a whole bunch of different ones. I can't wear the same one every time." So
there's an air of journalistic neutrality about it, and we salute you for that. So Ken and I have been talking a little bit about how strange it was, some of the timing of bye weeks in the Big Ten so far this season, and how we've seen teams like UCLA kind of come out a little bit flat out of their bye. Purdue, same thing against Notre Dame. USC having as good a 2 games as they had to start, having that 3rd week off. I'm just kind of curious, what's been your sense of the way the team has kind of handled that, knowing they've got kind of a lengthier stretch of games coming up after bye week was such a short time frame?
Yeah, I think that early of a bye week might not be ideal in the situation, but to get your conference opener forever, the first time you're ever going to play a Big Ten conference game in the Big House against Michigan, it might not be a bad time to get a bye and sort of just like circle the wagons, regroup. Even though things have gone well, you get a really good win against LSU that's got a lot of good athletes, and then pretty much do whatever you want against Utah State. That Utah kind of allowed a little bit more than USC did the week after that. And a quarterback, Bryson Barnes, who ran all over you in the Coliseum the year before with Utah. So I don't think it's a terrible time for it, but I mean, usually you'd like to get a few games in before something like that happens, but it seems like it was another good week of prep, and just to see how these guys have been, I think, especially on the defensive side, a lot more confident. Just the coaching seems so much better with Danton Lynn coming in over from UCLA, where guys maybe didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. And there was a lot of good athletes, but they just weren't gelling as a group. And it seems like they are now. So having a week off, I don't anticipate it being a huge issue for USC, but it's college football. We see teams look like completely different from one week to the next. So I wouldn't be surprised at anything, but it seems like they're going to be in an okay spot.
Brian, I want to stick right there where you just had it, and it's Danton Lynn coming over. We're a Big Ten podcast, so we're all about some defense on here. And that was the hugest question. And you just think about how he's implementing Eric Gentry off the ball, edge rushing. Look at Kamari Ramsey. And you look at the guys that were already there last year, like Jacoby Covington. And it's just, that's where you enjoy it. It's not just the guys that come in this year. It's taking advantage of what was already on the roster. But you talked about guys knowing what they're doing. We know the training has been a lot more efficient. But tell us about the best players on the team for anybody that hasn't watched USC on the defensive side of the ball. And also some of the things that you've seen specifically different from the defense last year that Danton Lynn has implemented that has them playing such a stout defense right now.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of them. I think Kamari Ramsey would be up the top. Coming over from UCLA, he's got the little green sticker, so he's the one wearing the headset and then controlling things, at least for the back 7 of the defense. But a guy like Mason Cobb comes in from Oklahoma State last year, thought it'd be a tackling machine and was really a mistackling machine. It just didn't seem to know what they were doing. If you watched any USC games, you don't want to see your linebackers like looking at their wristbands as the play clock is winding down and the ball's being snapped. They really didn't know what the heck they were supposed to be doing. And I think the biggest issue was that Alex Grinch and the defensive staff didn't make adjustments throughout the season. It was sort of like, hey, this is how we run things. The guys have to figure it out, as opposed to, hey, they're not getting it. We need to do something different. And I think I was really surprised with Danton the way he came over, especially from, the Baltimore Ravens. We've seen a lot of NFL coaches come into the college, and it's an adjustment because you don't have them for 50 hours a week or whatever you want. You got a very limited time. He goes into UCLA and takes the defense that was like in the hundreds and makes them top 20. And I think USC was hoping he could do the same thing. The results have been really good so far. We'll see, we're only 2 games in, but we're seeing guys like, Mason Cobb from last year come in and just look like a whole different player. And he seems so much more confident and they know what they're doing. I mean, the tackling is so much crisper. It just looks like a completely different team. And like you said, a lot of the guys were there from last year. So Bear Alexander, he's not even been starting, but I think he's going to be a key part for USC. But bring in a guy like Gavin Meyer from Wyoming, Nate Clifton from Vanderbilt. They were, the defensive linemen that were sort of rotational guys. They put 20 pounds on Nate Clifton. He's an interior guy now. They're both starting. So it seems like guys that even from other programs that maybe weren't superstars are playing at a higher level. And the guys that were sticking around that were on the defense last year, like Eric Gentry, you mentioned, they're also playing at a higher level. So it's about as good as you could have asked for, and you're kind of questioning like why Lincoln Riley didn't do this earlier, but USC fans don't even know what to do themselves. Like they're tackling people, like they have a defense, and LSU tried to run the ball. Like they said, we're going to run the ball. They have one of the best offensive lines in the country, 2 tackles that are going to be first-round draft picks probably, and they couldn't run the ball on USC, and USC fans didn't know what to do with that. So it's been positive, but a whole different story trying to go to the big house and do the same stuff.
Definitely.
Well, especially the way that Michigan's going to have their offense set up, starting Alex Orji at quarterback. You know all about Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards. They're both really strong running backs. It feels like everything is trending in that direction where Michigan is going to try to establish the run, milk the clock, do those kinds of things. It definitely sounds to me like USC is going to be able to kind of counteract that. But is there any sort of specific adjustment when you have to make when you have so many resources kind of dedicated to the run as Michigan is most likely going to have this week?
It's funny. The week 1 with LSU, that was kind of the same thing. Now, Garrett Nussmeier can throw the ball, and they had some success in the passing game. Intermediate routes were open. I think Danton Lynn left cornerbacks and a lot of guys in man coverage and one-on-one, and they really tried to slow the run game down. Even, they had a couple break in the third quarter, like their third string running back came in. But outside of that, I mean, there just wasn't a whole lot of success in the run game. So I think Michigan's passing game seemed more limited than what LSU's was. So then you got to take advantage of that. I think LSU could move the ball. And, at times when they were throwing some of those intermediate routes that they were open, there were a lot of quick passing. USC couldn't get a sack in that game. They were getting some pressure, but they couldn't get a sack. So I think that's one of those things where you're going to need Alex Orji to hit some of those passes. We just haven't seen him really do that in college yet. So I think it might put more pressure on him because I think USC did a pretty good job of stopping the run for LSU. We'll see what, I think Michigan's offensive line moving some guys around. They got a couple great running backs, like you mentioned, but I think they're going to, I think you can open up that run game a little bit if you can complete some of those passes. And, maybe Alex Orji can do it with his legs as well. Like I said, Bryson Barnes last week didn't really do much, and he had ran all over USC last year. So it kind of sets up similar to the LSU game, but maybe not with as dynamic of a passing attack. So I think getting that ground game going, even if USC is trying to stop it, if Michigan can run the ball, then I think it opens a lot of things up. So that might be the key right there, is just how much can Michigan run the ball on a USC team that's done a pretty good job. And a lot of Michigan's, run, they had a really good run game, 300 yards or whatever against Arkansas State. A lot of that, I think, was after contact, and USC's been a much better tackling team. So maybe you don't get those. Arkansas State's not very good against the run either, but maybe you don't get some of those big runs breaking after contact against USC. But that's going to be a fun battle to watch. And if USC can control that, I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on Orji to really complete some of those passes. We just haven't seen him complete yet.
You've answered every defensive question I basically had just now.
Sorry.
No, that's what you love about any guest, because like I was going to ask about contain, but you just talked about how easy it was to contain the Utah State quarterback. So it's kind of like it takes it away. James, is there another defensive question you have? So I'll move on, because Ryan just is knocking it out the park here.
No, I felt like this was the logical place to transition from one quarterback battle to one that's a little bit more settled, I would say.
Yes, particularly if you know, here with us having, of course, Caleb Williams as our quarterback. I think, and it's funny, I think a lot of us wondered, was it going to be Miller Moss? And I think even at the beginning of the year, James probably leaned forward to him, and I thought, no, it may be Malva. Speak to that, the fact that you have this kid that in the world of transfer portal decided to stay. Now, I will say this. I think when you have a great offensive-minded head coach, it gives more opportunity for someone to be like, you know what, if I maintain here, I may have a bigger opportunity later on to get to the pros. But the expectations for USC with knowing that, okay, we're going to start off with Miller Moss, was a situation where they thought maybe he'll begin the year, or did they know he was basically going to be Mac Jones in a way, in this kind of situation, being the backup who now seems to be as proficient as the guy that was there the season prior to him?
Yeah, I think they knew he was a different kind of quarterback. He grew up a USC fan. He just loved being at USC. So if there's any opportunity for him to play, I think the portal wasn't going to be, his option. It's funny. It's similar to Garrett Nussmeier, who USC played against LSU. Both were backing up Heisman Trophy winners, and both stuck around in an era that you don't see a lot of that. But I think Moss stuck around. USC, it's sort of the opposite of like where Florida State was like last December. Like early December, Florida State was on top of the world. You think you're going to go to the playoff, and it's been a complete disaster since then. USC was a disaster leading up to that. Lost 5 of their last 6 games. There wasn't any expectations for the bowl game. Caleb Williams sitting out. A lot of the veterans are sitting out. And Miller Moss comes in and throws 6 touchdown passes, sets records, and people started getting excited again. And Lincoln Riley hires Danton Lynn. You're like, okay, this could be. And USC's been like on a rise since then. And like I said, the opposite, like Florida State's been, we're not a big ACC podcast here, but it's been kind of the opposite. But I think after that game, we heard from Lincoln Riley before, thinking that he would bring in, because they didn't have numbers at quarterback. So you're going to bring in a transfer that's a veteran and maybe a young transfer. And after that game, he was like, we're not going to bring in a veteran quarterback. So he was going to, rely with Miller Moss. And getting a Jaden Maiava, I think, was a good fit, just because they didn't have another scholarship quarterback. Malachi Nelson transfers to Boise State. It just wasn't really working out for him. He's not even starting there, so it kind of tells you a little bit. But Maiava, like the Mountain West freshman of the year for offense, and there's a lot of upside there, but maybe not ready to take over a team that's going into the Big Ten. But we got to see him a little bit at Utah State. I predicted he was going to get a rushing touchdown in the game, and he did. He scrambled and got one there. So they like his upside a lot, and he'll tell you as much as anyone that he needed to play better in the spring. But I always felt it was just going to be Miller Moss's job to lose, and it was going to be a different looking offense. We've seen Lincoln Riley have a lot of success with different types of quarterbacks, and Moss was going to be someone that sort of followed the offensive recipe, where it was going to be a little more improv. It was like a chef with Caleb Williams. He could just kind of pull things out of wherever and figure things out. And so I think for Moss, he's sort of following here's the progressions. If that guy's not open, throw to this guy. If he's not open, go over here. He can move around a little bit and stuff, but he seems to be executing and within the constraints of the offense. And you're seeing him spread the ball out. I mean, they got 4 stud sophomore wide receivers, and none of them are really standing out. People are like, oh, is Zachariah Branch going to have 1,000 yards receiving? I'm like, no, they're going to spread the ball out all over the place. That's what they've been doing. So I think it makes it tougher to defend when there's a whole bunch of different dudes that could catch the ball, and anyone could have, Kyron Hudson making like crazy sick plays, and no one was even talking about him heading into the season. So I think it gives them some options, but it's definitely a different looking offense than with Caleb Williams, who can do so many things. And you just don't know what he's going to do. I think the offensive linemen don't know what he's going to do. But with Miller Moss, it's sort of more, okay, it's going to be like, here's what the constraints are, find people open and just get them the ball.
I like the way you phrased Miller Moss being able to go through his progressions. You definitely saw that in the LSU game. I thought he made a lot of really good throws because he was able to identify lanes to get rid of the football to. And I know Michigan does not have the defensive line that they did last year. I still think Josiah Stewart is a really solid guy getting pressure on the quarterback. After the 2 games that you've seen, how effectively has USC's offensive line played, and will they be able to have kind of that similar success in keeping Miller Moss upright and able to go through those progressions?
They did a pretty good job. LSU had some good edge rushers there, and I think they kept, a couple sacks, but they've kept him pretty clean. I think they've run the ball pretty well. They didn't, not as much against LSU, but they really ran the ball a lot better against Utah State. So I think that was a work in progress for USC. They moved Jonah Monheim from left tackle to center. Seemed to be pretty steady there. He's the smartest offensive lineman they have. I don't think they have a lot of depth, but luckily their backup center got banged up a little bit. But outside of that, they've been pretty healthy. And I think last year the last 2 years, they've tried to bring in transfers to plug them in. It worked in the first year. It didn't really work as well in year two. There seems to be more cohesion and stuff with the offensive line. But I think this is going to be a great Michigan front seven that they're going to face. And Michigan's still got, I know the defense has been a little spotty, but if you got 3 first-round draft picks on there's going to be some dudes who can make some plays. So they
Absolutely.
can put pressure on you, And so I think it's going to be a really good test. They were able to run the ball, and when they were able to do that, it seems to take a lot of pressure off Miller Moss. He is finding the tight ends a lot more than what Caleb Williams would do. They're catching a lot of passes. So I think that might help that they have spread it. I mean, you can run, you can throw to tight ends, you can throw to a whole bunch of different wide receivers, even the backs out of the backfield. So that probably takes a little bit of the pressure off the offensive line, but this might be, I think it's going to probably be their toughest test, if not the whole, certainly this early part of the season, if not the whole season.
With the way we talk about Luke Lachey and Colston Loveland on this show, Ken and I are certainly in the tight end fan club. So watching Lake McCree has been really cool for us. That's a Ken and I thing, though. I'll let him ask a question. I had to make that declarative statement on behalf of the show.
It is a question. I did want to ask you about Lake McCree and how well that he's played. He's caught all of his targets this year. But I want to also get a question in around about the offensive line. I think perhaps last year that may have been a question as far as right tackle, and Mason Murphy has really played well this season as far as not giving up sacks. But speak to the development of Mason Murphy and just how well, as James has said, we love tight ends here, how well Lake McCree has been a weapon for Miller Moss.
Yeah, I think for the as far as the offensive line goes, Mason Murphy at right tackle, and they bring Elijah Page in, who's a redshirt freshman playing left tackle, but played well in the bowl game. I think they've been really happy with how those guys have kind of handled things on the outside of that offensive line. I think communication's been pretty good. Jonah Monheim really helps kind of facilitate that. And Murphy's had some up and down games there, and it just, leading into this, but it seems like he's settled in a spot where he feels comfortable. Like I said, the cohesion's been good. So I think that's helping. I mean, to get those tackles to actually play well, where both of them could have been questions. So far, it's been good. So we'll see where that goes. But with Lake McCree, having the injury and being able to come back from it, I think since Lincoln Riley got to USC, a lot of fans were asking, how much of the tight end's going to be? Is there a Mark Andrews like you had at Oklahoma going to happen or anything? And there just wasn't much. I mean, there was just a very occasional pass. But now, picking up key third downs, I don't think Lake McCree's the guy when you get him the ball and he's going to break a bunch of tackles and run for a touchdown. But he's been a really good possession receiver, and even, getting some yards after catch, which we kind of would joke that, he probably never gets that, but he's been doing that even a little bit as well. And so getting the tight ends involved in the passing game and not just the run game, they've run a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends on the field, which we didn't see a whole lot of last year. So I think it's helping with the run game, and then getting those guys in the pass game. There's a lot of attention paid, if Zachariah Branch is, in there, and they got a couple tall guys like Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane that, you think could be big targets, and maybe you're double covering some of those guys, and Lake McCree's sort of going over the middle with a linebacker on them, and they're able to find them and get them open and catch balls. So it's definitely opened up some parts of the offense that we just haven't seen the first 2 years under Lincoln Riley. So I think it still has the capabilities of being, he's had a top 5 offense, I think, every year except one that was number 6. It still has those capabilities, but I think it's going to look different than at least the first 2 years he was at USC.
We've kind of hit on the run game a few different times in this interview so far, and I do have to say that USC has looked really effective running the ball. I love that it kind of gives Miller Moss that ability to kind of, pass at will, because he's got, the flexibility, really keeping defenses off balance. Just wanted to get your take so far on the way that USC has been able to run the football, specifically what guys like Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner have been able to do for this team.
Yeah, Woody Marks is like the third in a row or maybe fourth. Like, Marshawn Lloyd last year, he ends up being a draft pick, transferring in from SEC country. And then in year one, you got Travis Dye and Austin Jones from Oregon and Stanford transferring, all veteran running backs. And this year they get Woody Marks, who hadn't traveled we were talking to him and he hadn't been like to the West Coast ever before. And we're talking, he's like, man, the food's great here. This is cool. He's the nicest kid having a good time. Gets his nickname because he loved Toy Story growing up and he would always want to wear his cowboy outfit to school. And he comes out and it was a breath of fresh air, just someone that works hard, someone that is a really good player and just wanted to, kind of get a new opportunity. Another veteran. He's a leader in the club, a leader on the team in that room on offense and has performed really well, scoring a couple touchdowns against LSU and just someone that, like, when fans meet him, you just want to root for the guy. And they've been really lucky bringing in some of these veteran backs year after year and having them all fit in with the culture and hit and be really good players. And I think he's another one. I mean, he's someone that it seems like he's going to get the bulk of the carries. If he stays healthy, can be 1,000-yard rusher kind of guy for USC, but also pretty dangerous out of the backfield and does a nice job in pass pro and stuff as well. But Quentin Joyner seems to be that other guy that's coming in, and we've seen some success, for him. But Woody Marks is the horse I think they're going to ride, and he's just been a fan favorite, a teammate favorite, and just to watch him play the first couple of weeks, people are really excited about what he's able to do, and just kind of another way to open up the offense, having a guy like that, a veteran that really seems to gel in this offense with Miller Moss and everyone on the offensive line. And I think they can go a long way if he stays healthy throughout the season.
Well, Ryan, how will this offense, if they are going to beat Michigan in the Big House, what do you think they will have to do? What attributes will they have to accent to make sure that they can take down the Wolverines at home?
I think just not letting Michigan take anything away. If it's the run game, like I don't think just relying on Miller Moss throwing a whole bunch of passes. I think they have to stay somewhat balanced. So even if you're not getting as much success running the football, like pretty much LSU, they did a nice job, but they broke some runs. And I think a lot of those runs were opened up by Miller Moss throwing some of those intermediate routes and finding guys open 10, 15 yards. They were getting some good chunks. And then they do the delayed handoff to Woody Marks and he would break it. Even the winning touchdown, where you think they might throw a pass there or just try to run the ball in the middle of the field and kick a field goal, and he breaks free and runs it in. So I think not allowing something to get shut down like that, but they have to pass the ball. I mean, that's where they're going to pick up a bunch of yards. I think that's where they're going to be the most effective, and being able to spread it out where, like McCree's getting balls, or, Zachariah Branch maybe takes a little dump off and gets some yards after the catch. Any of those bigger receivers, just spreading it around like that, I think is going to help and kind of keep Michigan on its heels a little bit. But just don't let Michigan take any one thing away. And if if Michigan's having good success stopping the run, try to open it up more with some of their intermediate passing game. I think they did that really well against LSU, and they'll have to try to do that same thing against Michigan.
Definitely inclined to agree with that. Ken, did you have any additional questions? All right, it's time then. We are going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Ken and I want to make our game picks in this one, but we are also curious from you. How do you see this game playing out up in the Big House as USC makes their really triumphant entrance into the Big Ten in the biggest stage imaginable?
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. Just the 2 weeks or 3 weeks since the season started, what the thoughts of this game were, where now people are looking at USC like, oh, they should definitely win this game. Where before it was like, if you could win the game, it was like super gravy, like you wanted to get through the first 2 games. If you go 2-1, LSU, Utah State, and Michigan, you're like, that's pretty good, and now they're favored to win by like a touchdown. And,
yep.
So I think it's how USC handles this mentally. It's a little bit different. Michigan hasn't looked great, and USC they looked really good. But can you do that in a really tough road environment? To me, I kind of feel like just the way USC's defense has played, that's going to travel. And with Michigan's offense looking more one-dimensional than maybe we expected, I think that's going to, D'Anton Lynn's going to probably be able to exploit that a little bit. I like USC's offense a lot. Maybe they're only going to score, 4 touchdowns or something. Maybe it's like a 28-24 kind of game, something like that, similar to what LSU was. But I think they're going to be able to move the ball. And their special teams is significantly better than it was last year too. That's one of those things where, and I think Michigan got a lot of, they were really efficient with the ball. They punted well. They played the field position game, stuff that they're not really doing last year that they were doing really well this year. The USC seems to be doing pretty well in some of those too. So I like USC to win this one, but I don't think I would. The 6 points, I don't think I would touch that. I would take Michigan on the points, but I like USC to kind of win a close one for this one.
I'm going to pick USC to cover the spread. You convinced me a lot with just reminding me how effectively they played against LSU's run game. And the fact that Michigan, I think, is really going to attack them in that. And then I think if they tried to branch out a little bit, I just don't think you're going to see the cohesion necessary from Michigan to really be able to move the ball effectively through the air. And so I'm not going to say I blame you for me picking USC to cover, but I'm definitely going to say that your confidence and your ability to kind of bring that back into my memory, it played a role. Ken, how are you feeling about this one, man?
I'm not blaming anybody. And listen, Ryan, you've been fantastic. I look forward to talking to you down the line. One thing that we said, USC was the jewel coming in, so it's great to have SC in the Big Ten. I'm taking SC and the points. It's not even a question. Okay. Because I still have to see what Alec Orji does offensively. Like they may not be competent, and they have had issues passing the ball in the first place. So if they're one dimensional, I can see the 6. So for me, I'm taking SC. I think right now, and it could just be the beginning of the season, I think SC has something going, and I'm enjoying it. And maybe I'm I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, and I'm adding alcohol to it, and it's a good time. So I'm going with SC. That's where I'm going, Ryan.
It's funny. You can only play who's on your schedule, and maybe USC's schedule looks a little easier than it did starting the season. Like Nebraska, I think could be really tough, but like Wisconsin's probably not as good. Michigan doesn't look as good. We'll see how good LSU is. That they've won some games since then. But the Alex Orji thing is the key for me, because if you go with Davis Warren to start and you think, oh, he's a better passer and he's turned the ball over a lot, like, is Alex Orji that bad at throwing the football? Because if he can do any of that, I think that's going to help a lot. But if, like you said, if it's a one-dimensional thing, we just haven't seen it. So maybe he comes out and has a huge Tim Tebow type of game, and that's what Michigan's going to win on. But I don't know. It's just hard to say. It's a fun sport. It's college football. Maybe he has this amazing game, or maybe it goes the way we kind of think it's going to go. But I think if Michigan's one-dimensional, it's going to be tough to get a win there, because USC's defense is just playing so much better, and they're going to score points on offense just because they're pretty good at that. And maybe they turn the ball over a bunch. They haven't done that yet. Stuff like that can happen in a road environment, but who knows? But yeah, the Alex Orji thing, you got to watch. If he can play really well, then it gives Michigan a chance. If not, if he's still not throwing the ball well, it seems hard. It would be hard for Michigan to just run the ball and beat USC, I think.
Yep. I'm sure Michigan wishes they had the schedule they did last year, where they had a lot of their really easy games early in the season, would really kind of allow this offense to gel a little bit more, but not the way things work in the modern Big Ten, which is unfortunate for Michigan, but potentially a benefit for USC. He is Ryan Abraham, the owner and publisher of USCFootball.com. He also will be going out to, I think it's Rocco's Restaurant up in Michigan.
Rocco's.
Yeah, he's going to go have a gathering there of Trojan fans. So if you're heading up for the game, he's getting some folks together to talk some college football. And based on this conversation, you're probably going to be the most popular guy in the room, because you are so fun to talk to, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us. We really
my pleasure. Thanks. Yeah, it's in a town outside of Detroit or outside of Ann Arbor. I don't know how to say it, begins with a Y. It's like,
I think it's Ypsilanti. Is that how you say it, Ken? I think that's what it is.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm like, yeah, but it looks cool.
Welcome to the upper Midwest, Ryan. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, folks, we have broken down several games already in this episode, and we have a few more in the Big Ten this week that Ken and I are going to break down. But there are a few non-conference games that Mr. Davis and I wanted to get to, the first of which involves our, I guess, our sneaky favorite team, Rutgers, or at least mine. They are currently a 3-point underdog against the Virginia Tech Hokies. We've seen teams coming out of the byes in the Big Ten so far that have kind of laid eggs. Think of the UCLAs and the Purdues of the world. But I got to say, man, Rutgers, like them being a 3-point dog, even on the road, I'm a little skeptical of that line. What are your thoughts on this game, Ken?
I look at it as just being like a home field advantage when you're talking about the Hokies. But I think you mentioned something that makes me what's going to influence how I pick the team that I'm going to pick in where I'm going to go with the numbers. You talked about Big Ten teams coming out of a bye,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to think about still, regardless of pros or not. When you talk about college football, Graciano is a really good program runner, and I'm actually going to lean on the Scarlet Knights being able to go into West Virginia and definitely not give up the 3. But I think they may be able to pull this game out. James, what about you?
I'm I'm going to say not only do I think Rutgers will, not allow Virginia Tech to cover the spread, but I do also think they're going to win. I've got the reason why here too. Virginia Tech, they have given up more than 200 yards per game on the ground this
I knew you
season.
was gonna say that.
Rutgers, blessed with a gentleman named Kyle Monungai, who keeps setting career highs in rushing. And lest we forget, Antoine Raymond also averaging 6 yards a carry for Rutgers. This is a team that can run the ball down your throat. And against a Vatek team that is really vulnerable to the ground game, this honestly, to me, like there was like 2 bets that I made this weekend, like just instantly. As soon as I saw Vatek was favored in this game, I was like, nah, Rutgers is going to run wild on them. And I am just going with them instantly. So Rutgers Rounders, I am pounding the button for the Scarlet Knights.
As soon as you said I'm gonna give you the reason, I knew it was Cal and the run game, and I was like, "Oh, West Virginia must suck when it comes to run defense, or isn't good." Let me not say that. Isn't good when it comes to run defense.
We will get to another team that also sucks at run defense a little bit later. I did mention that we had some Big Ten matchups this weekend. One of them up in the Pacific Northwest, Washington's maiden voyage into the Big Ten. They are taking on Northwestern. 10.5-point favorite the Huskies are in this game against the Wildcats. This one, I'm a little more kind of on it. I don't quite know where to go. Perhaps Ken Davis, you can kind of give me a little bit of a reason to swing one way or another on this.
I don't like the 10 points, but I will say that I'm going to go with Washington, just because I think they still have enough remnants, and you still have a good coach bringing in from Arizona. With Finch, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to put up lead by 10 points on Northwestern, but I think it's still them entering the Big Ten, and Northwestern still has Big Ten trenches. And
Yes.
I know that's something repeatedly that we discuss on this show, and I still have to see what Washington can do facing that. And I know last year, a big of our questions in the playoffs was and this is a new program. I know Kalen DeBoer is down in Alabama, but still the type of quality recruit, because Washington has a recruiting base that you generally see them come from the Pacific Islands, all the West Coast. They funnel into there, and those young men are definitely difficult to move off the line and can definitely penetrate offensive lines. So with that being said, I think they will be stout, but this is still a Northwestern team that has a trick or two up its sleeve.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to take the points. I will take Washington with the victory. James, what about you?
It's weird. I want to kind of go in the same direction you are, because I saw what Cam Porter was able to do in the run game. I've seen what Jack Lausch was able to do in the second half last week for Northwestern. I thought he really kind of found his footing. My question is, are we getting first half Jack Lausch, or are we getting second half Jack Lausch? And so I think when you have a team with comparable defenses like these two do, I think they're literally like a yard or two off each other in terms of what they allow per game. I end up kind of going to the offense to make my decisions on this. And I just think that Will Rogers, he's got that certain something that I do think he can hit on a couple of really good touchdowns against the Northwestern team that I don't really think has been tested all that, strenuously in their 3 games on the lakefront. So I am going to go with Washington, kind of like you, but unlike you, I do think they will end up covering the spread. So I will go Washington 10.5. The Floyd of Rosedale game, the fair catch that wasn't a fair catch rematch. We have Iowa and Minnesota battling this week. This will be the NBC game, by the way, and I think might end up being the best Big Ten matchup of the weekend. We will see Iowa favored by 2.5 points on the road against Minnesota. Where are you leaning on this one, Ken?
My feelings are all over the place. I don't know if you've seen our last episode, but go to it if you want to see how I feel about Iowa right now. Um, I mean, I want to go with Iowa because it's been my sweetheart, but they have beaten me down and abused me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm gonna go. You know what? I'm forgetting. I'm taking Iowa. I'm going
Oh
with
man.
Iowa.
Okay.
I know. I'm going. This would be. Listen, Iowa. This is the last time. Oh
Yeah.
well, maybe perhaps, but I will take Iowa and I will take the points. I just hope I'm wrong, and I hope that PJ Fleck can look me in my eyes and tell me, look, you were wrong, and I will say, sir, I apologize
Mm-hmm.
for being wrong. But I'm going with Kirk Ferentz's team. I think perhaps they will be able to slow down that offense of Minnesota's, and just defensively, even if offensively they won't be able to score, just defensively will be able to win by a field goal at least. So I'm going with Iowa, James, reluctantly, and I'm taking the points.
This is another tough one, which obviously a 2.5-point spread is going to be a tough decision no matter what. But I think that when you have a situation like this, where both Iowa and Minnesota have really solid defenses, Iowa, one of the best run defenses in the country, Minnesota, a top 5 defense overall in terms of yardage allowed this season. They have had a really solid year on that side of the football. And they haven't just played cupcakes. They did play North Carolina, lest we forget. Like, they have had kind of that major team. I think the big deciding factor for me is that watching Iowa secondary last week really struggle to keep Troy contained in the secondary, just the way Troy was able to hit repeated downfield passes. It scared me a little bit about Iowa. And I would think of the two quarterbacks in this game, between Max Brosmer and between Cade McNamara. I do think that Brosmer has the bigger ability to hit that downfield ball. I think that Caleb Johnson and Darius Taylor are going to be just battling back and forth in the run game. I think that is going to be really fun to watch. I just think Brosmer can take the top off a little bit easier in terms of hitting those deep balls. And so I am going to go with Minnesota in this game. And I do want to point out, Ken, you've also picked 3 straight road teams to get this going. So you're
Wow.
really feeling the road love today, man. I got to
let
say.
you know I'm definitely losing this week.
I do not think so, especially after the way I completely, dribbled urine down my leg last week. So, all right, we've got a matchup of the Big Ten and the ACC, another one, rather, because we already had Rutgers and Va Tech. We also have Michigan State and Boston College this week in prime time in Boston. Boston College favored by 6.5 points. They've had a really tough schedule so far this season. They've already played Florida State on the road and played Missouri on the road, went 1-1 in those games. Michigan State really hasn't been tested as much. I did think the win against Maryland was impressive, the way that they were able to pull that one off. I think you and I would probably agree, though, that the Spartans maybe took advantage a little bit of some Maryland miscues in that game, but 6.5-point dog, the Spartans are heading into Boston. Ken, what are you feeling about this one?
You know what? I want to go with Sparty, but I think it's still a little bit too early. And I think this will be a good barometer. Take Maryland out of it, like you just talked about the miscues. And I'm gonna go with the coach again, like I did with Greg Schiano. I said this I think BC and Jim O'Brien are a perfect match. I think they fit terrifically. And I think with the fact that that team has taken on two pretty good adversaries already, that I don't think they're going to be sleeping, and I don't think they're going to take Michigan State for granted, because I think had Michigan State had not played as well as they had this year, I think they would have snuck up on a BC. But now I think teams are aware, okay, this is the Michigan State from last season, and we have to take them seriously, particularly if we want to have a chance to do anything after this season, and we don't need 2 losses. So I am going to go with BC. I think I'm going to take the points too, being at home.
Yes.
So I'm going to go with BC, and I'm going to take the points, James. What say you?
I completely match you on both of those points. And I think that Michigan State definitely has a chance to win this game. I think that the big key for them is going to be Aiden Childs taking care of the football. He has had an issue lately with that. He's thrown 5 interceptions this season, not really loving the way he's done that. I love his willingness to make plays. He's made them with both his legs and his arm. I think that that's just kind of par for the course when it comes to a younger quarterback and kind of getting comfortable in an offense. And I think that as the season goes on, he's going to grow into that role more and be able to take care of the football better. The other big one for me is Thomas Castellanos, the quarterback for Boston College. He runs the football a lot, and Michigan State loves to get after the quarterback. They are really aggressive with that. I wonder if maybe they fall into that trap, perhaps, of kind of over pursuing, not setting their edges, not keeping contained. That worries me. If they can clean up those two things, I think Michigan State can win, but I still very much agree with you that Boston College ends up coming out on top on this one.
I'm rooting. I hope Sparty can do it. I do really want us to get talking about Michigan State kind of getting back to where they were several years ago. That's one of the, I've talked about how I have affinity for Michigan State, and it's just one of those just hard, gritty teams that you like to see succeed within the Big Ten. And usually they will have a good quarterback or two. So I root for them, but this week we both can't take them, but perhaps in the future.
I absolutely agree with that. Okay, we got one more game that we have to pick, and another one. I kind of said that I instantly hit the button earlier on Rutgers. I hammered the button on Oregon State, a home 4.5-point favorite over Purdue. Ken, I think we remember Purdue giving up, 300 some odd yards on the ground and 6 touchdowns to Notre Dame. Oregon State's just going to run the football like crazy. That's all they're going to do against Purdue, and they've got the weapons to do it because they've got Anthony Hankerson and Jam Griffin. I think they're just going to run the ball at will against Purdue. I think that the Boilermakers will look better, but the fact that Oregon State has that run game working the way that they have so far this season, I am absolutely taking Oregon State. What about you?
It's not a question. And listen, I don't like browbeating any program, but there are a lot of questions when it comes to Purdue with good opponents. And we've seen what Oregon State can do. So, yeah, I'm taking Oregon State, and I'm taking the points. It's going to take a lot for me to kind of get behind that Boilermaker bandwagon. And I hope Ryan Walters can kind of get that ship straightened out. But as of right now, I don't see them being able to do it against Oregon State.
Absolutely. I think well said, Ken. And I think that my mom, by the way, really loved kind of some of the shots we were taking at Purdue last week. She said that was some of the funniest podcasting you guys have done. So I don't think we're going for that just mercilessly, like you said.
No, we're not.
Purdue, but don't give up 66 points to Notre Dame and we won't do it. I feel like it's very simple.
It's that easy. We are a Shut Them Up podcast. Like, even though we may have some Midwestern values that seem like that, we're nice people, quote unquote, but at the heart of Midwestern values is if you don't like it, shut them up. And that's just it. If you don't like it, shut them up.
I think that we had the Chicago that crept into us on that one, man. I think that you're kind, but then you're also like, just brush yourself off and get back up. Like, that's ultimately what it is.
That's how it goes, man. That's how it goes.
All right, folks in Big Ten country, we have given you our picks, a lot of game picks this week, ended up making 7 in all. We are really looking forward to a jam-packed week of college football. We will talk to you guys and break it all down next time on the Big Ten Country Podcast.
Congrats, you finished the video. If you want to build on that success, download the NBC Sports Chicago app. It's got highlights, exclusive insights, and push alerts tailored to you. Everything you need to be a real Chicago sports fan. Download it now.